how are we doing today? I wanted to share some new knowledge that I've been doing some reading, and I was a little excited tonight, so I thought I'd record this before I drank too much of this and got sloppy. As many of you know, I don't like the word obsessed, but I've been very, very focused recently on model trains. And when I focus in on something, I'm like a dog with a bone. I just really latch on. When it wears off, I'm out, but when I'm on it, I'm on it. But anyway, the model trains has led me to do some research on actual trains, and I learned something kind of interesting I wanted to share with you. And it has something to do with railroad tracks and the distance between those two tracks that the locomotives and cars sit on. Today there's basically three, really just two, but bear with me. There's three gauges. There's broad gauge, which is about 5 feet 6.5 inches. That's the distance. And those trains are in India and Pakistan. They move very slow, which makes sense for those countries. Although recently India has been adopting a lot of standard gauge, and standard gauge, at least in this country, 4 feet 8.5 inches. That's the distance between the two, and more on that in a second. And then in the early mid 1800s, narrow gauge came out, and the general accepted standard was about 3 feet. Though up in Maine they had a 2-foot gauge. Down in the south it could be 2.5 feet. Out here in the west it might be 2 3/4 or 3 feet. And obviously, even before standard gauge and that 4 feet 8.5, the early railroad tycoons, Vanderbilt, Gould, Huntington, who were some of the other cats, Stevens, although he's not really a tycoon, but all of them had different gauges to control their interest. Obviously, the cat in the north would have a different gauge than the cat in the south, so the train heading from the south to the north would have to stop and unload his shit and put it on the tracks, etc., etc. And at some point, I don't honestly know if the government interceded or these guys realized they could make more money if they worked together than worked separate. I'm going to presume it was a little of both. Standard gauge, 4 feet, 8.5 inches came to be. And I know what you're thinking, because I thought the same thing. Why 4 feet, 8.5 inches? 8.5 inches. Horse and wagons. You know what the width of those wheels are in those old wagons from the Old West? 4 feet, about 8.5 inches. Many believe that's sort of where it came from. And actually those wagons go even further back, because those designs initially, they believe, came from the ruts in the road that were discovered from the ancient chariots of the Roman Empire. Now those ancient chariots, you've all seen Ben-Hur stuff. They've got the buggy with the 1 horse or 2 horses. The 2 horse, it ended up being about 4 feet 8.5 inches. So really, that's kind of how it was decided. And if you think about it, think of all the things from the Roman Empire forward, at least, or the 1800s forward, that size controls a lot of what we build. Think of the space shuttle. Those big booster rockets from the 80s, for those of you that remember, those used to be hauled on train cars. Now, if it's 4 feet 8.5 inches, a little bit more, let's just say 5 feet 5.5 feet. That's all the bigger those booster rockets could be, because they got to go through these tunnels for the trains. So some of the most modern technology, even though that was 40 years ago, design considerations had to be made based on the Roman Empire. That I found really, really fascinating. That's one of the things I wanted to share. I thought that was sort of cool. So early 1800s, mid 1800s, narrow gauge, as I was talking about, came into being. And narrow gauge was never really a main line, but what they found was if you narrow the tracks up some, locomotives could be smaller, the train turn could be tighter, which meant less excavation, less dynamite to blow up mountains for tunnels, less, again, excavation for the train rails and stuff itself. And it boomed. And by 1880, there was like 11,000 miles of narrow gauge all over the country. Again, we're going to say narrow is 3 feet, but it varied. In the South, they used it for hauling cotton and hauling sugarcane. In the West, goods. In the North, oil and things of that nature. The drawback ultimately ended up being, though, is those tighter curves mean slower. A smaller locomotive means they could pull less. And the reality is, it took them about a decade, but they figured out it really takes the same amount of time and labor to make a tunnel, whether it's a 3-foot gauge or a 4.5 foot. It ends up being the same amount of dynamite. Much like for you pipe guys out there, it takes the same amount of labor to make an 8 foot as it does to make a 4 foot. It just became a reality, and that 11,000 feet in 1880, by 1890, was down to 1,000 feet, and it basically disappeared. Today, I'm going to say there's less than 1,000 miles. There are still some railroad narrow gauge in Colorado, I think in Arizona, where you can take a 3-day weekend and you can take a restored train and go through the hills of the Sierras. Something I'm planning on doing, but it's very, very nice. But they've become novelties more than anything. But one place you can go here in Southern California is Disneyland. All of Disneyland's trains are narrow gauge, and that's thanks to Mr. Disney, Ollie Johnson, and Ward Kimball, these train nuts, because they were actually buying what was then considered a miniature train because it wasn't a standard gauge full-size locomotive. You know what? Here, take a look at a couple of pictures here. This will give you a sense of standard gauge versus the narrow gauge, the size of the locomotives. It'll give you a little sense and perspective. Go ahead, take a look. Right, you see what I mean? Kind of gives you some perspective. But anyway, Disneyland, it's all narrow gauge railroads. These were old plantation locomotives. I think one was even brought over from Europe, fully restored, et cetera, to pull people around. And it also was able to make the tight turns going around Disneyland proper. I thought that was really interesting, and that's really what I wanted to share. The whole goes all the way back to the Roman Empire and the chariots, and that Disneyland was narrow gauge. If you have some real interest, it's real easy. Just Google, or what I always say, crack a book, take a look. I've got a lot more reading and stuff to do. We've got some more work to do on Bourbonville, but more on that later. Anyway, in this world, when you could be anything you want, when you could be anything, be kind. That's not a T-shirt of the week. Just be kind. Be humble. And that's hard to do, but just be humble. And damn it, be forgiving. Let stuff go. Don't harbor. Life's too short to have hate in your heart. Just let it go. Surround yourself with people that you care about and that care about you, and enjoy the time you have, because it ends. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this. Like I said, do some more reading on this, not just the narrow gauge and stuff, but just railroads in general. It's very, very interesting. Today, at its peak, I don't know if I said this already, it was 250 million miles of railway in the United States. Today, it's about 144,000, but they do 1.7 billion tons a year. Can you believe that? 1.7 billion tons on 144,000 miles. I think we're the largest rail system still in the world, which blows my mind. But anyway, that's enough. I'm going to go finish this and go pass out. It's getting late. Have a good night. We'll talk to you later. Bye.